Hey everybody, this is Blake here, and welcome to my review of Monuments Men. Now, I've been trying to film this stupid video all freaking day. Now, you might be thinking, but Blake, isn't this a vlog? Shouldn't that be taking, a single take? Well, usually, I'm not as natural at this as other people are who could certainly do that without issue. For me, it's just I try to keep a certain level of energy. I try to keep a certain level of enthusiasm, so I try not to bore you. But above everything, I try to make sure my reviews are organized. I make my points as clearly as possible, and I have enough points to even go into. And the problem with a film like Monuments Men is that it doesn't give me much to work with as a reviewer. So I do these vlogs and I watch them back and I just realize I'm not really saying anything substantial. I'm more or less saying the same thing over and over again, and it's just like wasting 10 minutes of your time, and I don't want to do that. So I bring this up just as a warning that, once again, Monuments Men, there isn't a whole lot I could say about it, but also if I start to lose my voice, that is why. I could already feel it giving out on me. So anyway, on to the movie itself. I was really looking forward to seeing this. In fact, I'd say it was among my top 10 most anticipated films of 2014, maybe even top 5. Everything about it just screamed awesome. I love the cast. I love watching these guys interact. I thought the plot was really quirky and had a lot of potential for comedy, but also a lot of potential for some really good suspense. Much like Argo, it had a kind of a funny situation going on within this more serious and dark situation, and Argo, I thought, did a pretty good job balancing that, and I was sure Monuments Men would be the same way. And above everything, it just looked really, really good. The trailer totally worked its magic on me. And when they pushed this back from sometime last year, I believe either November or December, to February, most people saw that as a kiss of death, that maybe Monuments Men isn't very good, and I should have been one of those people, but for some reason instead I got excited. I began to see Monuments Men as my week off of either bad movies or mediocre movies, because let's face it, January was not kind to me, and February wasn't going to look that much better. I mean, for the next month, everything that comes out I'll probably see, but it looks just so mediocre. RoboCop, Pompeii, I am not expecting anything from those films, but I was expecting a lot from Monuments Men, so this was going to be the gem amongst a pile of shit, and I was really excited to see it. But then the reviews started coming in, and I was shocked at how much the critics did not like this movie. Now, that generally doesn't mean anything to me. If the official critics, like the guys on Rotten Tomatoes, if they review a horror film, an action movie, or a comedy, more than likely they're not going to like it, but there's a good chance I will like it, or at least will be more partial to it than the critics were, because I like those kinds of movies. But Monuments Men seemed like the kind of movie that the critics would automatically love, just like how they loved Argo. Especially considering George Clooney really, really wants his Oscar. That's one of my biggest complaints regarding him, is I feel films that try too hard to be Oscar winners don't usually feel sincere to me, even if everybody else loves them. I was not the biggest fan of George Clooney's last few movies. They were overall solid flicks, but I don't know, I'm just very wary of those kinds of movies. So the critics did not like Monuments Men, and that really started to concern me. So I went ahead and watched the movie anyway, because like I said, I was really looking forward to it. And let me get my notes up. I learned from my mistakes, so if I do 5 different variations of this video and I keep screwing up my sentences, I take freaking notes, damn it, and I'll make sure I deliver everything I want to say in a cohesive fashion. I kind of already botched that, but I will not stop it just for that. So, is Monuments Men bad? No. It is technically well made. I thought the cinematography was very nice. It was well edited, not in regards to the content, but in just terms of how every scene kind of flows into the next scene. The score was actually probably one of my favorite parts of the movie. It's the type of music that would appear in like an old classic World War II flick. It's very upbeat and inspiring, and in a way it almost feels to a point out of place in a modern day movie, but it made me feel very nostalgic, and I really liked that. So, on a technical level, Monuments Men is fine, if not pretty good. The problem is just in terms of the content. Monuments Men is really a bit of a misfire. When you take a look at every single scene, it's a pretty good movie if you just look at each of those individual scenes, but each of those scenes don't really feel like they belong in the same movie. Hopefully I'll explain my points clear enough, but so like the first act, for example, I thought it was pretty funny. I enjoyed the film's sense of humor, and I enjoyed watching these characters, play off each other. It has a great cast from Bill Murray to John Goodman and to George Clooney and Matt Damon, and a bunch of other guys I don't really recognize, or at least not by name, but they all played off each other very well. They all had good chemistry. But the problem is the characters themselves, I felt like we were missing too much information about them, and that really starts to hurt the movie over time. And I was kind of confused too because, they introduced George Clooney like they would a normal main character. They introduced Matt Damon like they would a normal main character, but everybody else is just kind of introduced in a montage, and I was wondering if they maybe cut that down. So like Bill Murray, you don't even really see or hear the dialogue when he first meets up with George Clooney and Matt Damon. The music's playing overhead, and it's just one scene where they're like, "Oh hey," and then it cuts to where they bring in the next guy. I don't know if they actually cut out any of these characters' backstories, but it really did kind of feel like that. So, like for example, later on in the film, Bill Murray's talking to another character, and suddenly Bill Murray gets kind of sad, and he leaves, and then this other character plays a record that I believe his family had recorded for him, and he plays it over the speakers, and then Bill Murray's in the shower, and suddenly he gets all emotional, and I thought the acting in that scene was really good, and the music was really good, and it was a very moving scene in itself. The problem is I either missed what was making Bill Murray's character so emotional, or they never really gave us any reason they never gave him any reason to be all emotional for that. I was wondering, did he have an estranged relationship with his own family? What's going on here? Does he just miss his family? They did not do a good job at explaining these characters and why they act the way they do in certain ways. So that was just, above everything, it was a missed opportunity, but it did really undermine some of their fates, because not every character is going to get out of this movie alive, and even though the scenes themselves, like I said, they're pretty well done, but because we know so very little about these people, it just doesn't matter as much as it should. But that's a major issue I have with this movie. But the tone was another big problem. In fact, I'd say the tone is probably the film's weakest link. The drama and comedy worked, but they did not work well together. So the funny parts tended to undermine the suspense. You'd have, a very lighthearted, funny moment followed by a very, very suspenseful, intense moment, and then somehow followed again by another funny moment. And because it kept breaking up the tone to where it would be serious and then funny, then serious and then funny, you could never really take the suspense too seriously. And then that worked against the comedy too, because it just gave you a whiplash in terms of the film's tone. Like, there would be this real depressing bit where a character dies, and that would be preceded by a comical bit, and then it'll be followed by a comical bit, and that just totally undermined the tragedy of that situation. So it started to really just affect the overall picture during the second half, or maybe a little later than that, but because at first I could take it to an extent, but eventually the funny parts just stopped being very funny because there was too much darkness within the story, and then at the same time I could never totally be invested in the tension because the comedy just was kind of working against it, and so that really just made this film seem very confused and misguided, and as a whole just misfire. The cast is good overall. I had no complaints regarding the acting. I'd say if the only person who didn't really stand out as much as they should have was Matt Damon. he doesn't do bad or anything. He just doesn't seem to have as much material to work with as the other actors do. Like, Bill Murray has. That one real sad moment that was really good, but he also has some real good funny moments too. Matt Damon doesn't ever get to show off his dramatic chops like the other guys do, and nor is he to get the real funny moments too. He has this running gag where his French, he could speak enough of it, but it sounds really bad. And it was funny at first, but I felt it kind of dragged on a bit. They kept bringing back that joke. Another thing, too, is I didn't feel it used its cast very adequately, and I actually forgot to write that down in the notes. So I was hoping to see, John Goodman, Bill Murray, Matt Damon, George Clooney, and everybody else together, so we could learn more about them, and also just it's fun seeing big stars like that interact. Well, even though, like I said, the interactions were good, for the most part, they decided to split everybody up. So you have a big star paired with a lesser-known star or somebody I just did not recognize. And these lesser-known people, they did really good too. They held their own, but still, it's just not the same. I would much rather watch John Goodman play off of Bill Murray instead of John Goodman playing off the French guy, who I like the French guy, but I just kind of a missed opportunity. When you have a big cast like this, I want to see them together. And if they also had them all together too, maybe they could have fleshed out these characters more, because everybody would have had more screen time, and therefore we could maybe understand their motivations that much more. But since they were split up, there just isn't enough time to really flesh that out. Now, maybe at one point this film was much longer. Maybe it was like 3 hours long, and then these characters were all adequately fleshed out. But maybe whoever cut it down, whether it was Clooney himself or the studio hijacked it from him or whatever. Or maybe it was never just that good of a movie to begin with, and it needed another rewrite or something. But whatever the reason is, just the film, it works in parts, but not as a whole. But that doesn't mean Monuments Men is bad. It's just I wanted it to be so much better, and it wasn't. Would I recommend it? I'd say it's a strong rental, but I don't know if you should go see it in theaters unless you really, really want to, and in which just really, really lower your expectations, and then you'll probably enjoy this movie more than the people who have already seen it did. So that's really all I have to say. I did not do a written review of this, but I did do written reviews of VHS 2, the sequel to VHS, which is a found footage horror flick, The Reef, a killer shark movie, Shinobi no Mono 4, Siege, an old school ninja flick that was made in the 60s, Man of Tai Chi, Keanu Reeves kung fu movie. So please read all of those. Follow me on Twitter. Follow me on Facebook. Yes, I am finally making use of my Facebook account. And what about critiquing the critics? Well, I don't want to spoil too much, but you can expect that by the end of the month. I've actually already begun. I have this big relaunch planned, so I have to get it done before March when speaking of which, when I start to review a franchise, be sure to vote as to what movie franchise you want me to review. The options are American Ninja, The Howling, the animated Dragon Ball Z flicks, and others, but go ahead and vote there. So hopefully you enjoyed this video. I'll see you guys later.